All right, welcome back, everybody. I am Dr. Greg Eckel, and this is What the Health. I have my esteemed colleague and guest today, Dr. Ben Lynch, and I want to give you a proper introduction, Dr. Lynch. He is the best-selling author of Dirty Genes and president of Seeking Health, a company that helps educate both the public and health professionals on how to overcome genetic dysfunction. He received his doctorate in naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University, and he lives up in Seattle with his wife and 3 boys. Welcome aboard, Dr. Lynch.
Awesome to be here, Greg.
We have our topic today. I kind of put it into a mouthful. We're going to talk epigenetics. You are the genetic maverick out there. You educated the world on mthfr at the beginning there. Drove me nuts. I think I've shared that with you in my practice of all of these people coming in. I have methylation issues. And it's like, what's going on with this Dr. Lynch? But thank you for being the pioneer and bringing it up. And then also your lovely book called Dirty Genes, which I am super appreciative of, because then you educated everybody that, hey, you can actually do quite a bit about this. So, an overview, so often in 20 years of being in clinical practice, people say, oh, well, my parents had it, it's in my genes, right? You are such a great educator around genes are not your destiny. And, we're dealt these cards, we're given this information from our ancestors, and, you're educating people about what to do. And I think this came out of your personal story and in your life. So how did you get into this to start?
It was a long journey. I mean, getting to where, my thinking is today to where it used to be, as a kid has evolved immensely. And, it first started when I remember my stepmom telling me that alcoholism was in my family and schizophrenia was in my family. And, I remember standing in the specific hallway in our home, and my back was up against the wall, literally and figuratively, when she said that, well, you're almost hitting puberty, and that's when schizophrenia tends to hit. I was like, wow, thanks for that uplifting information, which was entirely, somewhat correct. It does tend to hit around puberty. But if you have dirty genes, it's more likely to hit. If you have clean genes, it's less likely to hit. And so I think our own unconscious fears kind of drive our future. And hopefully it's towards a good way. And, and then I was watching Tale of Two Mice on a Nova video where they're talking about how these genetically bred mice for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer, they're specifically bred for these conditions. So the researchers can do things on them to see if they can mitigate or, help us humans with those conditions. And the researcher said, since these mice are genetically predisposed to these 3 major conditions and affecting massive amounts of people across the globe, what if I just change their food a little bit, and let's do it also in the pregnant mouse and see if her babies are going to end up getting these things. Well, she introduced folate and some other types of nutrients in the mom's chow. The babies went on to live fine, and they did not get the cancer, cardiovascular disease, or diabetes. And I was like, whoa, hold on, wait a minute. You're telling me that these mice are genetically bred for these things, and you just gave them some nutrients and they don't? And then after all that brilliant research, at the very end, she goes, well, and we don't know what to do with this information. Right. It's like, well, I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
wow. That's awesome. So you put it together and went down the rabbit hole, so to speak.
Yeah, the mouse hole.
The mouse hole, literally the mouse hole. Yeah. Right. You're right. So on that, you started out with the methylation and mthfr, and we're finding, about 60% of the population has some issues with that particular SNP. And, at the beginning of the education, people freaked out. And in fact, I still see people today like, oh, I'm homozygous for methylation pathways and I'm screwed,
Yeah.
And then, people would run out and get on methylated B12 and folate and then run into a whole slew of issues. So first off, maybe for our listeners and viewers, why is this one like a mother load or big issue? You have 7 in particular in your book, Dirty Genes, but I think this one kind of started you down the mouse hole, so to speak.
It did. When I was working with patients at Bastyr University, I and other clinics, you start to learn how specific treatments help certain conditions, right? And then you plug and play literally your patient into those programs. If they have leaky gut, they're on this program. If they're detoxifying, you put them on that program. And then I quickly saw that some patients got better, some got worse, and some had no improvement. And I was like, I wonder if there's a genetic component to this. And one day I was studying bipolar disorder, because I was just rattling off, how you can support bipolar and basically not cure it, because there is no evidence of cure in terms of anything. And I typed in research bipolar in folate, because I knew there was a folate connection. And then National Library of Medicine popped up something bipolar and then mthfr, this acronym. I was like, what in the hell is that? So I had no idea. And mthfr is a gene which basically produces our body's #1 form of folate. So we hear about folic acid all the time, and mthfr's job is to make our body's #1 form of folate called methylfolate. And so if you have an mthfr gene, which we all do, but it can vary in terms of how it's functioning because of what you've inherited from your mom or your dad, or your mom and dad, plus the environment in which you're in and how your lifestyle is currently. And so all those things influence it. But let's say your mthfr gene is dirty, meaning that it's working slower. You have increased susceptibility to all sorts of things, like increased cardiovascular disease and neurological disorders and detoxification, indirect issues, oxidative stress, asthma, skin disorders, histamine issues, pregnancy complications. I mean, you name it, it's a big player. But on the flip side of that, you have to understand, well, if mthfr gene has a genetic variation which slows it down significantly up to upwards of 80%, which is common in the population, 70, 80% reduced function, and so many people have it, maybe there's some benefit to it. So you have to start thinking about that when you look at the research too. You can't research benefits, but it appeared to be selected for in individuals who were in high malaria areas, because if you are exposed to malaria, your red blood cells tend to get damaged. And if you have another type of folate, you can make those red blood cells really quickly, because methylfolate doesn't make those red blood cells, but folinic acid does. So those with mthfr conserve that type of good folate, so they're able to make red blood cells and live. So there's definite benefits to it.
The upside. And, I think we often see that of looking more harmoniously. I think people think, well, I'm damaged, but there actually are good reasons for the adaptation through time, right?
Yes. Yeah. And in the work that I do, there's all sorts of genes which are scary. The BRCA gene, BRCA1, is scary for a lot of people. Then you have the celiac, genes, which are not scary, but, you definitely can't be touching gluten. And then you have other genes for cystic fibrosis and on and on. There's definite genes out there that say, if you have this gene, you're going to have this problem. And mthfr is, if you have this genetic variation, you don't have a specific problem. You're not locked into having to be gluten-free like you are with celiac. You're not having cystic fibrosis, dialed in. You are basically increasing susceptibilities of multiple things, but you're not set in stone. And that's the beautiful thing. What I really like about my work is it's not fateful. It's not negative. It's empowering, because once you know that you have a slower mthfr or other genes are slower or faster, and you know how the environment influences them, you can really make changes in your life that makes a massive impact, and you can feel great literally within an hour.
Yeah, that is amazing. And so I'm wondering, so what are some common symptoms for folks, or how do they know? I mean, okay, you can test for that gene. And then how do you know if it's actually active or not active, if it's like expressing itself in an epigenetic sense?
Yeah, great point. So that's a great comment. So question. So if you, let's say you've inherited, like myself, I've inherited from my mom and my dad, an MTHFR variant, which have reduced my ability to produce methylfolate by 70%. So my MTHFR gene is quite slow. And when I saw that, it scared the hell out of me. And that was based back in like 2012 or something. It's been a while. So if you look back, I want you looking first at family history. Don't just look at yourself, look at your family. What did your family consistently struggle with over generations? Heart disease, cancer of a very specific area, neurological issues, Alzheimer's or early dementia, or maybe they're more depressed or more anxious or more suicidal. What does your family kind of show a consistent trend towards? And then look at yourself and say, oh, I have moments of anxiety at the moment. If your family history has anxiety, it's like, well, I wonder if I'm susceptible to that. In my particular family, cardiovascular disease is a big one, and so is cancer and is dementia. So let's go. So first look at that, and then you start looking at yourself in terms of, how am I feeling? Is my mood kind of consistently depressed or consistently anxious? Or, is my blood pressure elevated? And if you're not sure about your blood pressure, do you say, do I have more headaches? Is it bounding, especially if I'm lifting weights or exerting myself? So with MTHFR, the thing is, it's so environmentally influenced, outside of even your gene, how you're born with it, that it can be impacted by even simple nutrient deficiency of vitamin B2, riboflavin. So the biggest and easiest, most effective way to check your MTHFR is to check your homocysteine. You have to check your homocysteine, but that is not, it's not perfect, because homocysteine is impacted by multiple other things too. So, but if your homocysteine is high and it's an inexpensive lab test, there's many things you can do to mitigate it. And the problem with homocysteine is labs will tell you that if it's greater than 15 micromoles per liter, whatever the units are, if it's greater than 15, that's not good, and lower it. But that's too high. It really needs to be around 7, 8. Well, I would, 6 or 7 is perfect in an adult. But in terms of symptoms with MTHFR, I hate to be so vague, Greg, but it can be pretty damn much anything.
Sure. I'll see folks with constellation of anxiety, neuropathies, vivid dreams, even in this realm. So I'm with you. I mean, it's not the panacea like causation of all of these symptoms, but just trying to get folks tuned into it. A lot of the folks that are watching What the Health are tuned into it. And we want to get them a little bit more educated as far as, okay, well, let's get nuanced with this and kind of take the discussion up to the next notch.
Yeah. And the reason why I can't give, I know where you're going with it, so people can just do a quick scan. In the book, Dirty Genes, I have some questions for people and some quizzes and some more specific examples. But really, at the end of the day, for MTHFR, it is so vast in its influence in our human body, because it controls, it's kind of the regulatory gene for methylation, which then controls almost every single one of our genes. Well, it does, plus 200 others specifically. So it's a huge gene.
So let's talk about, so when basically we got first educated, it was like, okay, well, simple, check the homocysteine, get on some methylated B12 and methylated folate. And then there's pitfalls with that, right? Then we have this methyl trapping, and people said, oh, well, I got on these products. I got them from your Dr. Lynch's website. I took a bunch of them, and wowie, they got like, everything got worse or whatever, and, that was not, I'm not saying that as a diss at all. It's just like, people
No, I hear you.
on Google.
Yeah, it's accurate.
So then, like what, there's there's the art of this science, and this component of pulsation, or, how do you, you do a great job in the book. So I am going to plug the book a lot, as it is a great read. And I love your questionnaires on each of those big top seven. I think it's seven, right? We got seven. Yes. And, but in particular here for MTHFR and methyl trapping, a lot of people get frustrated of like, well, gosh, I just want to be on this regime and press go. And it's like, well, you just can't do that. Right. Can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, it's something that is very, very deep in our culture and society, where if we find out that we have something, like say we have antacid or acid reflux, doctor puts you on antacids, and those are supposed to be a temporary fix. Antacids are always supposed to be temporary. Yeah. But they're never temporary. Right. It's like, here, take it, done. And we want that type of medicine as individuals, because it's easy and we don't have to think. We get in a routine and a pattern, and then we can go through life. If you have depression, well, you can take your antidepressants and go through life. You're done. Or you can take your 5-HTP if that helps you, and you take it every day and you go through life. The problem is your day changes. Your environment changes. The food that you eat changes. The people that you're around, the chemical exposures, the amount of light that you get, the amount of chemicals that may be in your immediate area. All these things really make an impact. And the news you may hear, or the news that you don't hear. So basically think of it this way. If you're driving your car, in Seattle, it's pretty hilly. And if you're going to work, there's different times of traffic and so on. And then if you go to Florida, it's flat and straight, and you can fall asleep in the wheel in like 10 minutes because there's nothing to do. But think of it that way. Genes have jobs to do. And I really want you to understand that. So anytime we talk about genetics or epigenetics, you're like, oh, those are big words, I'm going to tune out. Mm-hmm. But genes have jobs to do, and that's it. And epigenetics is basically how the outside things which influence how your genes function. And the beautiful thing is you control the majority of that epigenetic control of your own genes. And so if you are on vacation and you're enjoying sun and you're having good food and great people around you, your genes are not working very hard. They're at rest. But if you come back, and then you're not going to need very many supplements. You might not need any supplements. And you come back to, wherever your home is, and now you start bickering with your significant other. Your kids are driving you crazy. This coronavirus thing hit. Now you're stuck in quarantine, and you're out of work, and mortgage is getting up the hill. You can't pay it. So now your stressors are going up and your genes are working triple time. Now you need those nutrients. So if you're taking methylfolate, let's say, when you're stressed out and drinking alcohol and you're feeling great. And this actually happened to a buddy of mine. He was drinking alcohol. He was stressed. And I was like, you know what? Well, as you're tapering down on your alcohol use, try some B vitamins, including this methylfolate stuff. It's really powerful and really effective. And a month later, I saw him. He's like, well, Ben, that's great stuff. But you know what? I've increased my drinking because now I don't have any side effects from it. I get hungover. I get drunk, but I don't get hungover. So it's great. I was like, that's not what I wanted. Yeah. But I said, okay, well, when you start, it's still mitochondrial poison, dude. You're going to have to stop drinking that alcohol. So, because he was struggling with other things. So long story short, he cut off the alcohol, but he kept taking the methylfolate and the B vitamins. And I told him, I said, if you keep taking this methylfolate when you don't need it, you're going to start having anxiety, irritability, auditory hallucinations. This is real. It's strong stuff. Yeah. And he was driving his car, and he goes, well, I was starting to hear things.
Hmm.
And I was starting to freak out. And I quickly remembered, oh, I'm still taking the methylfolate. Ben told me to stop it. He stopped it. Everything went normal. Why? Because his genes weren't having to process the alcohol anymore. It was too much methylfolate, too much neurotransmission.
Aha. Yeah. So that kind of pulsating on how full your cup is. That's a great way of talking about it. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Drink alcohol, have some methylfolate. I was in Texas for a conference, and when in Texas, eat like Texans.
Yeah.
And we went to a Brazilian grill, and I was there, no kidding, Greg. I was probably at the table for 5 hours eating all sorts of cuts of meat.
Yeah.
And I had the meat sweats. I took that because it was time for bed. I probably had horrible sleep. The next day, I took about probably 12 milligrams of methylfolate spaced out throughout the day. If I took even a milligram today, this morning, I'd probably be ballistic. I needed 12 milligrams that day because of so much homocysteine in my body from the protein.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So, that's nuance. So, right. You're the pro geneticist, naturopathic doc, and you're dialing it in like that. So for the lay public, get connected, get Ben's book, but also realize it's not just get on a program and go. Yeah. There's some nuances here. And you do write about that really well in the Dirty Genes book on, rinse, repeat, and recycle there,
Yeah. And it is harder, and it requires what I keep repeating in the book, tuning in.
Yeah.
You have to tune in. What did I do? What action did I do, or what action did I not do? What did I eat? What did I not eat? What influenced how I'm feeling right now? You have to be aware of that. And if you're not aware of that, you're going to struggle. If you're taking a multivitamin that's really weak, yeah, you're probably okay taking it every single day. But if you're taking a multivitamin that's potent and well formulated and you take it every day, you're going to have issues. So
yeah, and that's a great point, for folks to really, I oftentimes they'll say, I just don't want to think that much, but it's, we're wanting folks to be consciously tuned to their body and living in it. But the good news is once you get to the point, you get enough feedback loops to say, oh, that's what just made me feel like that. Then you have way more certainty on what your mood is, what your energy is, really maximizing your health going forward. So it really is worth putting in the heavy lifting in a time period. Like, just stick to it. My encouragement, I like to say I'm a cheerleader a lot of times during the day.
yeah, exactly.
And, just staying with it. It's not a forever process because you do ultimately figure it out. Of course, new stressors come up. So, which leads into some other big pathways that I want to talk about, right? So we have the methylation and mthfr component as a major driver for a lot of stuff. Now we're seeing a lot of folks in the clinic around the histamine pathways. And in particular, the advent of low, everybody's got their specific diets, right? There's the low histamine diet. There's a low sulfur diet. There's the GAPS diet, things like this. So in the histamine, are we seeing an increase of issues around histamines or histamine metabolism? What do you think's going on with that? Any experience with folks on a low histamine diet, how that plays a role here in the genetics discussion?
Yeah, lots. So I'm highlighting a certain pathway here.
Awesome.
So people can get an understanding of this. Okay. So first, as I want to back up just really quickly and say that when I say with mthfr and you check your homocysteine by itself isn't bad. Homocysteine is very useful. It helps your methylation cycle keep going. It helps synthesize your glutathione. It's needed. And with histamine, it's the same way. Histamine, you need histamine. You need histamine for stimulating your immune system. You need histamine for stimulating your stomach acid. You need histamine for gut motility so you're not constipated. So you need histamine for blood flow. It's very useful to have this for increased alertness. If you ever pick up antihistamines, it says right on the package, careful, caution, if you're driving or using heavy machinery, this may make you drowsy. Why? Because it's antihistamine. It's going to make you tired because histamine increases your alertness. You need it. So with that said, too much of anything is bad, and too little of anything could be bad. You know, if I hugged my wife all day long, she's like, you know, Ben, I love you too, but enough already. You know, let me be free. So histamine is the same way. And what I'm seeing, Greg, with the histamine thing is, one, it's an increased awareness. I think this high histamine thing has been around forever. I just think people are now finally starting to dial in what they're struggling from, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
The problem is, if they blame it on histamine without going another step further, they're just going to be taking supplements to alleviate their histamine response, or going to be taking meds, or they're going to be removing foods or drinks which increase their histamine. And then that's all palliative. It's not long-term. So you need to really understand how histamine is formed, how histamine is eliminated, and how histamine, well, actually before it's eliminated, how it's released. So it's formed, it's stored, it's released, and then it's eliminated. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing is an increased prevalence or increased awareness, or both. Okay. And what I highlighted here, so this is a histamine pathway, and I'm going to bring it in here really closely for you. So awesome. Here's histamine, all right, in all caps. So if you look here, stress and infections increase the conversion of this amino acid, histidine, which is found in protein, and it will produce histamine. So increased stress and increased infections will increase your production of histamine by itself. And then to go even further, if you follow the arrows, histamine has to be released, okay? And high dopamine, high norepinephrine, high epinephrine, basically stress, and infections and inflammation will increase the release of histamine. So what my point is on this is, we're in a very stressful society. We have huge amounts of information, which is a blessing and a curse, and we're inundated with it. And with that information, we're also on screens before bed, and we're not getting adequate, sufficient sleep or healthy sleep, which then increases our inability to withstand stressors. And I'm very acutely aware with people, if I go like that, yeah, and I scare people, yeah. Right? So you didn't jump. Yeah. So you have a very good adapted ability to, see, oh, there's a stressor, but I'm good. Yeah. Other people, and there's a contractor here at my home now, and he might be just his head in a hole, or he's working, he doesn't see me, and I go, hey, Jim, and he just jumps. Yeah. And I just say, hey, Jim, and so his stress response is hyper aware. So his histamine is probably also high. So I want to say most histamine, I want to tie it down to a few things: infections, mold, and stress. Uh-huh. Cool. So we may be seeing a rise of those things in addition to more awareness. What on that, so one of the placating things, like, people get tuned into it and they put it all on food, right? Yes. And then they start restricting their diets, and then, like, they're not eating anything anymore. Then They're running into all kinds of other nutritional deficiencies, and they're kind of paralyzed in that area of, like, I don't know what to eat. I can't eat anything but, like, these 3 items, or else I feel ill. How do you bring somebody back out of that? I mean, obviously that's a huge question, and there's a lot of nuances for an individual, but you've got a product that I really recommend to folks until we figure out the root underlying issues. You got the histamine blocker, which works really well for folks that develop hives or, have those flushing reactions. The histamine is released out of the mast cell that creates the inflammation, right? We're here, and I'm just down the road from you in Portland, Oregon, and we've got allergy season raging right now in the Northwest. And so it is a nice one until you figure out those underlying issues. What do you see kind of the nuances on that pathway for folks? Is there a genetic component or deficiency for some that make them more hypersensitive, along those lines? Yeah. So yeah, it is allergy season. And I always forget it's allergy season because I don't react to anything, which is amazing. And I'm very thankful for that. And I have a very dirty histamine pathway. And with my mthfr, I'm right there. I'm increased susceptibility by itself. So you're right. A lot of people, the first thing they'll do is they'll turn to food and drink to reduce their histamine. Now, if you're eating, if you're drinking a lot of wine or champagne, and you cut that back, that's great. That's needed because these things really do increase your histamine. And if you're drinking red wine and you get flushed, and it's not just histamine, it's also aldehydes and sulfites, and alcohol by itself, which turns into aldehydes. So it's multifactorial, but regardless, it will increase your histamine. So reducing that will help. But if you're also reducing your sauerkraut, your kimchi, your fish, your aged meats, your aged cheeses, all these types of foods, now your menu is reducing, and that by itself is increasing stress. So now you got the stress increasing because your food variety is down. So now you have the stress increasing your histamine, not just the food. So you might be not even really improving. And the other thing is too that I am very acutely aware of now is the microbiome. If you're restricting your food, the diversity of your microbiome goes down, and the more likely you are to have a decreased ability to adapt to various things, and you're going to have gut issues, especially when you try to reintroduce these particular foods. So let's say you have high histamine or high oxalates, and you're removing the oxalates and you're removing the histamine. Well, when you're removing those types of foods which contain those things, your microbiome, which currently was feeding upon those, there's certain strains of bacteria, they're dying, they're gone. So now the diversity of your microbiome goes down, which makes you even more intolerant to other foods. So like you were saying, that you start seeing patients only like on 1 and 3 foods, which is horrible because the diversity of their microbiome goes down. So histamine block is phenomenal, but I really like people, histamine block is a DAO enzyme. And DAO is a gene which I discuss heavily in the book, Dirty Genes, which is called diamine oxidase. And its primary role is to break down histamine located outside of the cell. So it helps break down histamine from food and drink, but also the microbiome. So if your microbiome is higher histamine, or your gut is inflamed because of high histamine, or you have acid reflux, which a lot of it is actually associated with high histamine, you have a high histamine outside the cell body, and you're going to be having all sorts of issues because you're going to be absorbing that histamine inside the cell. Now you're going to have allergies, you're going to have skin rashes, you're going to have irritability, anxiety, insomnia, and so on. So to palliate while you're improving your gut health, histamine block is very useful. So is probiotic histaminics. So is reducing the histamine-containing foods and drink, but short term. But then doing a stool test, like a CDSA from doctor's data or what have you, because if you have certain bacteria, they can really increase histamine because your immune system is trying to attack them possibly, which drives up your histamine. But you also have something called blastocystis hominis, which is very, very high histamine producing. And I had that. And a quick test to know if it's histamine is you can just take your hand and your finger and you can just scratch yourself, dermatography or whatever they call that. And you can, I scratch myself now and I don't get red at all. So actually I just got a little bit red, a little bit, very little.
Yeah.
So that's a great simple test too.
Cool. Oh, that's great. Lovely. All right. So then the next one, anything else on the histamine pathway?
Yeah. So the histamine pathway, it always ebbs and flows, and asthma is a big one. So breathing difficulties, exercise-induced asthma. So if you're exercising, you get really red in the face. That's high histamine. Difficulty breathing, asthma, and then it seems like I was doing research, Greg, on histamine, and I found this one amazing paper that basically shows how histamine is associated with almost any pregnancy complication.
Really?
And I was like, wow. So using histamine block during high-risk pregnancies can be very useful because the DAO enzyme is produced by the placenta.
Wow.
So some women actually feel better when they're pregnant because they're having additional support from the DAO enzyme breaking down that additional histamine, which is really cool.
That is super
so
interesting.
yeah, if you're having pregnancy complications, histamine needs to be checked out. And part of that is PCOS is common in infertility and pregnancy complications, and pregnancy increases estrogen. PCOS increases estrogen, or it's basically a result of high estrogen and low progesterone, and adipose, which is also, estrogen producing, the bad one. But high levels of estrogen also increase histamine. So if you're overweight, obese, inflamed, infected, nutrient deficient, these are all playing a huge role in microbiome issues in histamine. So histamine is massive.
Yeah, cool. That, again, so everybody, this is What the Health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel, and I've got my guest today, Dr. Ben Lynch. If you're just tuning in, please go to the website, naturecuresclinic.com/podcast. Share this with your friends, family, neighbors, your community. This is where we are getting the information out to you and your loved ones. So histamine, I want to cover a whole nother pathway here with you, which is sulfur and sulfur metabolism. And this one, are you seeing, again, we're having some colleagues are putting this forth as a major imbalance for a lot of folks of sulfur and sulfur metabolism. There's some really great research to support that. My good friend and colleague and co-founder of the clinic here, Dr. Greg Nye, is big into this one with his research with Stephanie Senoff. I think it is a piece of the puzzle for folks. So sulfur, you hear a lot of folks say, oh, I have a sulfur allergy or sulfa allergy from antibiotics, etc., which sometimes is a different issue, right, for folks.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at this one and the SUOX pathways and along those lines, what's your kind of thoughts on this one?
Well, it's there's a number of thoughts, and I'm excited about it because it's also increased awareness.
Yeah.
And Stephanie Sneff is doing a great job, and sounds like your colleague is also doing a great job on this as well. There's a lot of talk about a particular gene called CBS. And if you have this particular genetic variant in your CBS, 699 variant, it's called, that it increases its function of CBS. And therefore, if you have a faster CBS gene by birth, then you're going to have sulfur issues. And I think that is a huge claim that needs to be really evaluated, because as with a lot of genes, there's huge amounts of epigenetic influence, massive amounts of epigenetic influence. So, and I've done a video on YouTube about CBS and sulfur upregulation. Your CBS gene, if it is working faster, yes, you can increase the sulfur intolerance. And so how do you know if you have a sulfur intolerance, first of all? And what is sulfur for? Sulfur is used for huge amounts of things in your body. It's essential. You have to have it. And Stephanie Sneff's work is amazing on this. And I'm nowhere near her talent with it. But what I will say is it's really important for your blood flow. It's important for your brain, your neurotransmission. It's really important for eliminating a variety of compounds, for detoxification, for your collagen, your joints. It's important for signaling. So it does many, many things in your body. And when it's deficient, you have a lot of problems. And when you have excess, you also have a lot of problems. Again, it's that pulsing thing. So if you find out that you're high sulfur, and what you do is you eliminate all your cruciferous vegetables, and you eliminate all your sulfur-based supplements, your N-acetylcysteine, your MSM, your glutathione. You reduce your protein intake. You do all that, and you're increasing your molybdenum is a mineral to help get rid of sulfites. And you're doing all that, and you feel phenomenal. You feel great, and you're like, God, where has this been my whole life? And so then you do that for about a month, and you're starting to feel weaker, dumber, more tired, colder, starting to get breathing difficulties, which if it's the other side of it. And I actually had a patient like this, Greg, where we found out that she had sulfur intolerance, which was signs of sulfur-based breath, really sulfur-based, foul egg armpits. When they sweat, they smelled like sulfur. They just smelled like rotten eggs all the time. If they ate anything containing cruciferous vegetables or eggs, or supplemented with, sulfur-based supplements, they would have foul-smelling sulfur gas, flatulence. They had a distended gut. They could have diarrhea because too much hydrogen sulfide in the gut can lead to explosive diarrhea. So all these things, you just think sulfur, that's what it kind of smells like. You're a sulfur waste plant. So you reduce the sulfur and you feel really great. And you stick to it, right? You're on it. Now you're on the plan and it's like clockwork. You're used to it. Now you're starting to get slower thinking. You're getting colder. Your chest is heavier. Your joints are sore. And a patient of mine, we put her on this low sulfur stuff. So she had no sulfur supplements. She was on basically no sulfur-based foods. And she emailed me. She goes, Ben, I'm having difficulty breathing. And I was like, well, you were having difficulty breathing before this. So how's your sulfur intake? Oh, I've been really strict. I'm like removed all of it. Okay, well, how long has it been? Looks to me that's been about 2 months, 3 months. She goes, yeah, and I've been really, really compliant. All right. Well, patients can be lying, A, or B, they could be telling the truth. Right. I thought, okay, she's telling the truth. What's going on here? So I thought maybe she would have a glutathione deficiency for increasing her difficulty breathing, plus a deficiency in hydrogen sulfide. And so I said, well, I want you to take some, I'm not going to give you glutathione, but let's do some MSM. She was like, that's sulfur. I said, I know, I think you're too low. And I said, stop the molybdenum. Let's get you on MSM. She was like, well, it's going to break my program. I said, I know. Keep me posted. She took the MSM. She reported back. I can't remember the exact duration, but it was fast. It was basically less than a day. She goes, my breathing is good again. And I said, okay, well, what does that tell you? It tells me that I need to, be mindful of how much sulfur I'm bringing in, and I can't take too much, or I feel this way. And if I have too little, I feel that way. I said, perfect. So just ebb and flow. And so these people, Greg, some of them will be really, really compliant, or other ones will say, oh, I'm too low sulfur. So then they have a broccoli, kale, collard greens smoothie with eggs, and they take their glutathione and their MSM and their N-acetylcysteine. They just load up and they feel great for about a week, and then they just go to hell. So what the health, right?
Yeah, what the health, indeed. Yeah. So it is like that component drives people batty, and also providers as well, is that it's like, oh, too much. It's like the Goldilocks principle here, right? Like we got to be in the sweet spot. There's going into it, coming off of it, going into it, and then really trying to, figure out so you don't get that ebb and flow in the sweet spot where then you're really just thriving. So the sulfur in particular, I mean, we're seeing environmental causation at drive, making dysfunction on that pathway. Suox was not one of the ones. CBS was in the book, Dirty Genes. Do you have another book coming out, or a sequel?
I am being pushed hard.
Yeah.
To write another one on the brain and dirty genes, and because the CMT and the MAO-A genes were really, really popular in the book with anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia. So and for good reason, right?
Yeah.
But I'll get there. But I honestly don't feel like I really wanted to write a book specifically on mthfr years ago, and I'm very glad I didn't.
Yeah.
Because it would have been a major disservice to people. Dirty Genes is way more comprehensive, and it really informs and guides people how to help themselves holistically. And a book only on mthfr would be wrong. It would be wrong. And so if I utilized basically the same genes as I do in Dirty Genes for this, neurological book that I want to write, it would be a disservice because I'm looking at dopamine transport. I'm looking at some other genes for dopamine and norepinephrine and epi, and my understanding isn't where it needs to be yet.
Yeah.
So I'm being patient. So I mean, it would be a useful book, but it's not as good as I want it to be.
Cool.
But you're right, Suox is really important. And let me show you a few things here with Suox. So here's Suox, okay?
Yeah.
And genetic variations for this Suox gene are the National Library of Medicine is not showing. It's very rare to have a Suox variant, because if you have a Suox variant that is really slow and you increase a lot of sulfites, you're basically going to have really poor health. I mean, really bad and be dead. So it's not really that high in the population genetically. But what you need to understand is arsenic and tungsten, especially arsenic, is very, very high in our food and our water and medications and supplements. Rice protein, brown rice, drinking water, very high in arsenic. Chicken used to be, I don't know about it anymore, but apples spray with arsenic. These things slow the Suox gene down. So environmentally, epigenetically, this gene is getting hammered from the increase of arsenic and tungsten in the environment, which if this gene is being hammered and can't function, your sulfites levels go up. So you really need to be filtering your water. You really need to be, not consuming rice protein, or at least testing it. Greens, you need to be making sure they're tested and not so high in arsenic in terms of supplement industry. And then supporting the cofactor with molybdenum. A lot of people will be taking molybdenum and they'll feel really, really good, because what happens when you take molybdenum, that's the nutrient needed to help the Suox gene. It's the cofactor. So without molybdenum, this gene won't work. Even the absence of, say you have no arsenic or tungsten in your body, which that would be amazing. But let's say it's really low and you're eating sulfur-based foods and you feel like crap, and you have no genetic variation, but you don't have enough molybdenum, this gene will not function. So you start adding molybdenum, and now you can take that sulfite and break it down into sulfate. And where does it go? You pee it out. Okay, it's gone. So it's like the missing link. So molybdenum can be phenomenal. So if you drink red wine and maybe have a drop of molybdenum or two, as molybdenum drops prior to drinking your red wine, and seeing if that really makes a huge difference for you. And it may, especially if you add it with a histamine block. Those two things. Don't increase your wine intake, please, but at least you won't be hungover or feel bad.
Awesome. Well, okay. So this leads right into the kind of the end of the show here. Talking about proper detox, right? So in the book, Dirty Genes, you did a great service for folks. I totally agree. A book on just mthfr would have been a disservice, but the way you presented it, you really holistic and naturopathic at its roots. So, kudos to you on that one. So what in an ideal Dr. Ben Lynch detox program? I mean, obviously it's more explicit and laid out in the book, and also your companion online course is a great compendium and a support for folks doing this. But what's involved? Like, people aren't destined. I'm kind of wrapping it back to the beginning of your genes are not your destiny. There's a lot that you can do. What are those components that on the epigenetic sense, there's a lot that we can handle? What's the detox philosophy here for you?
Well, when a lot of people hear about detox, what do they think, Greg?
Well, they think they're going to be sitting on the can all day and, getting their colon blown out.
Right. And for how long, do they do it? And what time of year do they do it?
Unfortunately, we see so many people that think they're just toxic, that they're detoxing all of the time. But a lot of times folks are doing it in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And so you break up a great point. So a lot of people think detoxing every day is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I'll give you just the summary of a story here. There was a patient who, to warn people about this, there was a patient who was in the waiting room. I'd never seen her before, and she was diagnosed for fibromyalgia, and chart number 3, this thick. And so I went out to go get her, And she goes, excuse me, it's going to take me a minute to get up. I was like, okay, that's fine. And it literally took her over a minute just to stand up. She was in so much pain. And then she slowly made her way to the room and slowly sat down on the exam table and proceeded to discuss the fibromyalgia and what have you. And then she started giving me, what supplements she was taking. And then she was taking a lot of detox supplements and a lot of anti-parasitic, anti-bacterial types of things. And I said, you know what? So I told my assistant to go get me chart 1 of 3. They went to archives. Luckily, they had it. And it was diagnosed of fibromyalgia. And I looked at the date. This was 4 years back.
Oh.
And I said, what happened? She goes, well, I got sick in Mexico. And I've been, I said, so what happened? She goes, I got an infection, parasite. I said, okay, so you've been killing this parasite for 5 years. Yes. You've been detoxing for 5 years. Well, about 3 years. So, okay, still. And you're taking all these detoxification supplements still. Yes. So I went to my supervising doc and I was like, hey, this lady is detoxing too fast. She's detoxing too much. She needs to stop. And my supervising physician is environmental specialist. He's all about detox, and he was pushing against me. And I was like, look, she's detoxing. She can't handle the detox protocol. She's hurting. She can't move. You're just recycling the toxins in her. And I said she needs to stop all of her supplements, every single one of them, and go sit in a sauna or a hot bath and sweat. He was like, all right, go for it. So he goes, I don't agree. 2 weeks later, she's back on the docket, or maybe it was 3 weeks because she's scheduled for the hot peat bath. A couple of weeks after that, I see her name. I'm all excited to see her. I walk out to go get her. She jumps out of the chair and gives me a huge hug.
Wow.
So my detoxification philosophy is more of avoidance rather than active detoxification. I want you to understand that you're breathing 11,000 liters of air every single day. So when you concern yourself about if your toothpaste has fluoride in it, or your sunscreen has this chemical in it or that, you need to focus on what air you're breathing. You also, since you're breathing 11,000 liters of air every single day, 24 hours a day, your whole life. And the only way to prevent that is to die. And that's not a good way to go. The other thing is water. As we age, we lose our hydration significantly. So babies are about 70-80% water, and as older we get, it's less and less. So I want you filtering your water. So if 60-70% of your body is water and you're not filtering it, you're polluting yourself. Heavy metals are pervasive in drinking water, and they're pervasive in the air that you breathe as well. Because clouds come over and bring in all sorts of compounds. So I want you focusing on more of avoidance than active chelation and supplementation, and also sauna, sweat. If you can't afford a sauna, don't worry about it. Just dress up in a lot of warm clothes and go for a fast walk and sweat. It doesn't matter how you do it a few times a week. If you can't sweat, then you need to, probably hydrate and get on some electrolytes and evaluate your sleep and other things. But I want you focusing more on avoidance rather than adding supplements, please. Avoidance is way more effective because you're preventing the incoming. If you're actively supplementing, but you're not filtering your air or your drinking water, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, you got a hole in the bottom of the bucket, so to speak.
Yeah, and the hole is smaller in the bucket to eliminate, and it's smaller compared to what's coming in.
Yeah, awesome. So we got air, water, and saunas.
And food. So the dirty dozen is a big one. I can't tell you how many times I see parties with strawberries from Costco or from anywhere that are not organic. Apples, strawberries are in the dirty dozen. So the Environmental Working Group every year produces what's called the Dirty Dozen checklist or what have you, along with the Clean 13. And the Clean 13, you do not have to buy organic. There's not enough discussion about this. Yeah. Meaning you can buy fruits and vegetables that are not organic to save money because they're not very sprayed at all. And you can do well on that. I don't know what that is. I should have printed it out. But you can just go to ewg.org or just type Clean 13 Dirty Dozen PDF and find it. It's right there. It'll be easily accessible for you. The Dirty Dozen, you either do not buy, you grow your own, or you buy organic. It's that simple. You will do much, much better.
That's awesome. We support Environmental Working Group here at Nature Cures Clinic and love their resources.
Awesome.
So
they're a phenomenal organization.
Yeah, that's great. All right, coming down the home stretch here, any last parting wisdom or words that you would like to share with the listeners of What the Health?
Yeah. Life is a journey, and my company's name is called Seeking Health for a reason. It's because you're always, you're listening to this podcast with Greg and I right now because you're trying to improve yourself. And while we can provide the information, you need to take action on it. And part of taking action is it's overwhelming because after this podcast, you're going to listen to another one, or Greg and I just said something which contradicted the 3 others that you just listened to. So now you're in stalemate. So just whatever resonated, hopefully something resonated with you, take action on it right now in your life and don't listen to another podcast and go implement it. When you're reading Dirty Genes, you're going to be reading all this information and all this work that you need to do. If you read something like, oh, that is me and that I'm doing that and I need to fix that, stop, put the book down and go do it. And don't pick it up again until it's habit and you're flying. If you don't pick up that book for another 2 months, 3 months, because you've implemented one change, that's awesome. You've implemented one change. So don't beat yourself over the head by doing 50 different things at once. It won't stick. So my favorite movie, What About Bob? It's baby steps. Okay. Take baby steps.
Nice. I love it. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure having you on here. I love that. Get into action, folks. Get into action. That is sage advice. Again, everyone, this is What the Health. We are here on Tuesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We are also found on your favorite podcast player. Make sure you share us with your friends and family. Give us a review. Help us get the word out because you're getting here from the source. Thank you all.